Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're still in Unit 2, and today we're going to be talking about the epidemiological transition model. Now in our previous video we were talking about the demographic transition model, so when we look at the epidemiological transition model, there's a very high correlation because the main purpose of the epidemiological transition model essentially is to look at the variety of deaths that are really some of the main culprits in a society based upon the stage that a country is in terms of the demographic transition model. So I would think that as we go through the different elements of the demographic transition model, it kind of makes sense as we look at the causes of death, because if you think about how population growth is tied to levels of development and really the conditions of a society, then the epidemiological transition model really just kind of makes sense. So if we begin looking at the different stages, just like the demographic transition model, we're going to look at the 4 stages, and then we'll look at the hypothetical 5th stage as a result, as a part of the demographic transition model. So if you remember stage 1, I don't know if you remember what stage 1 looked like in terms of demographic transition model, but remember it was a stage characterized by low growth. It's the lowest levels of development, social development, economic development, in terms of medical technology, all these types of things. So really just primitive societies. So if you think about the types of diseases that are most prevalent there, we're talking about really just deaths that are going to be caused by poor sanitary conditions. And a lot of it has to do mostly with just a lack of understanding of how diseases work, bacteria works, and the transmission of diseases, and how to maintain proper sanitary conditions. And so those are going to be the most prevalent forms of death in terms of the main culprits for killing off people in society. And if you think about those types of conditions, the people that are most susceptible to death are going to be the young. Again, their immune systems are not developed. There's really no knowledge of vaccinations or inoculations, how to maintain proper sanitation within the home, things like that, trying to keep your drinking water clean, keeping waste away from drinking water, and washing your hands, and those types of things. So just some different examples there, things like dysentery, which can of course be caused by a variety of bacteria and things that you might find in unclean drinking water. The Black Plague, if you think about Europe, of course was brought in by rats, and then the rats were feasting on some of the trash and refuse that was around in cities. Things like the Ebola virus, which can be transmitted because of the lack of understanding of how to properly wash your hands, and the type of contact that comes between individuals who have those particular illnesses. If we move into stage 2, you remember stage 2 is characterized by very high growth. One of the things that begins to happen in stage 2 is people begin to move into cities. So with the high growth and the people moving into cities, there's going to be deaths that are primarily related to overcrowding. And when I say overcrowding, one of the things we can look at is diseases that are highly communicable. Things like cholera, well, cholera not being highly communicable, but the flu, which is highly communicable, or other types of disease that will move from person to person very quickly if you're living in cramped, crowded conditions. Now, something like cholera, that might be related back to poor sanitary conditions, but a lot of it has to do when you have too many people living in the same space, and what can happen to especially the drinking supply because of the things that get into your drinking supply. But again, a lot of it has to do with these lots of people living in smaller spaces, again characterized by higher population growth. And so we get these diseases that are highly communicable and can spread very easily from person to person. In stages 3 and 4, now in stage 1 we talked about how you had a situation where the young are primarily susceptible to disease. In stage 2, we begin to find some diseases that not only are going to get some of the young, but can also kind of get some of your intermediate ages and things like that, especially those maybe who hadn't had things like the flu before. And the flu really can strike just about anybody in a society. Stages 3 and 4 are going to be characterized by diseases that are going to attack primarily the elderly, neuromuscular diseases, things like that, because what's happened in stages 1 and 2 is we've been able to develop more improved medical technologies, we've been able to keep people alive for longer, and so as the body wears on, we're gonna encroach upon some diseases maybe that we hadn't seen before, or maybe weren't as prevalent in society because people just hadn't lived that long. And so when you get things like Lou Gehrig's disease, Alzheimer's, various forms of cancers and things like this, things that people really didn't have to deal with because, at least not larger percentage of the population, because people were not living long enough to even get these diseases as they got older. So stages 3 and 4, because it's the more developed societies, more advanced healthcare systems, being able to get treatment to the young, and then helping the middle age kind of live through different stages of life. So stages 3 and 4 are going to be those that attack primarily the elderly. Now if we move into stage 5, that hypothetical stage 5, we're looking at diseases that are going to be what they call re-emerging diseases. These are diseases that we thought that we had gotten rid of. We thought that we were able to control with vaccines and medications and things along those lines, but we've seen have merged, or not merged, but morphed and changed and adapted. And this is where you get into this conversation of not necessarily over-vaccinating, but using antibiotics too often, using certain kind of medications too often, because it causes some these culprits to begin to change and adapt to their environment. And so you have the situation where you have these stronger strains of viruses or bacteria or the like that emerge, and we don't really know how to deal with them. And so certain things like the avian flu, of course a different strain of flu, that's a little bit different because this actually made its way over from Asia. We also have the swine flu in the United States there that was coming up from Central and South America. Another example might be this Mrsa, which is a new form of a staph infection, a bacterial infection. They call it a super staph infection because it's very difficult to treat and can kill very quickly. People were very concerned about the Ebola virus, a new strain of the Ebola virus making its way over the United States. They're talking about one that potentially could go through the air and be transmitted that way, but that seems to not be true. But anyway, so it's this idea that you have these strains of viruses and bacteria and things that are adapting to the medications we're using and are morphing into new strains. And so that's the concern, is that as the medical technology increases and develops and improves, then potentially these diseases could reemerge themselves. So anyway, that is the epidemiological transition model as it relates to the demographic transition model. Again, all we're looking at is what are some of the major causes of death for people for the people in the population as we move through the various stages of the demographic transition model, especially as it relates to the development of that particular country. Alright, that's it for this video. Next we're going to be looking at the 5 basic shapes of population pyramids and how those relate back to the various stages of the demographic transition model and population growth.